Well, shooters and reloaders and 3 circles, passengers and members is Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone Express. And as you know, what we have here are 45 ACP cases, except they have the small primer pockets. They take the small primers. And you know how we hate these because they foul up our procedures and operations. But yesterday, I went to the range and shot a bunch of 45 and picked up a bunch of 45, a lot more than I shot. Well, it turned out that everything I picked up was these small primer pockets. So, like it or not, we may very well be winding up with small primer pockets in our 45 ACP and maybe everything eventually. Because these are non-toxic primers and they are very well regulated for use with the small primer sizes. The ammo factories have got it pretty well together now with the small primer pockets. That's why I say we may have to get used to these. So let's go ahead and deprime these and resize them. Well, what you're looking at is my Lee app press, and that's for advanced processing press. And we're going to go ahead and use this press to run our brass, to process our brass. So I've got our small primer pocket brass right here, and we just go ahead and dump it into that bin. Lee calls it a collator. Now once we've dumped it in, we just shake it like this. And that causes the cases to fall base first into these tubes. Camera's in the way, so I won't show you, but you get the idea. It doesn't take that long to do, really, except when the camera's in the way. So it really doesn't take that long to fill those 4 tubes. And I've got it all set up for the 45 ACP. So I got the resizing die in here to deprime and resize the cases. The first one came in upside down. Okay. You've seen this before, so let's go ahead and show you how, you see, deprimed. Once again, you might be asking how come I'm doing this instead of just depriming and then doing the wet tumbling. Well, if I go ahead and resize it like I'm doing, then I'll save myself a step later on. I'm going to go ahead and take these cases and do the wet tumbling after I resize them. And no, I've never scratched the die. Now we'll just switch this to the next one, like this. Well, you get the idea. It won't take long to do this. Well, you know, there's no sense doing a partial load of wet tumbling, so I got some of my old brass from these coffee cans that I stored them in, and when I checked it out, I remember this brass. This is the brass I use to shoot IPSC, major powers, so that's why these took a bit of effort to resize, full-length resize this brass, because when you shoot major power, you wind up getting the brass kind of expanded out, so resizing is a little more of a chore. And so there it is, and the Lee app press just gobbled it all up. Quite a workout actually though, but not bad. Let me show you some of that brass. Like for example, this one is military RA 1962, and I remember this brass because I used to go into the gun store and I pick up maybe a couple hundred rounds of brass every time. They were selling it for a nickel a case, and I had to go back and take the crimps out of these. So you see the little bevel there, that's the crimp removal. And then here's another military case. Head stamp's almost gone because it's been reloaded so many times. This is the Winchester case. And here's a commercial Remington case. And again, went ahead and sized these back. Took a little bit of effort. No cleaning before sizing these. It works fine. Goes very quickly. Well, we'll just show you some of those cases fresh out of the sizer deprimer, and notice that the primer pockets are pretty clean. These non-toxic loads shoot cleaner, and maybe that's a good thing because we don't mind having clean primer pockets before we even clean the brass, right? So this brass may very well have some grit on there, but it's not going to be a problem. The carbide is harder than the grit, like artificial diamond. So we're not going to scratch the carbide. If anything, the grit might get in there and then cause scratching of succeeding brass cases, but that doesn't happen. If we saw that happening, we wouldn't be doing it this way. So anyway, of course, you can go ahead and deprime and go ahead and wet tumble and then resize, or maybe even put the brass through a progressive reloading press. So it all works for you. I know that you've got your procedures set, but for those of you who are thinking about the possibility of going ahead and doing the wet tumbling after resizing, certainly there is a rationale for that. So this is what I mean. This is the tungsten carbide die that we just used. And that carbide ring in there looks perfect. But if you look carefully, the steel ring around the carbide has suffered its share of dings and dents and scratches, but not the carbide. And that's because the carbide is one of the hardest substances known to man. It's actually tungsten carbide is what it is. And you see here a couple of casualties from the processing, crushed cases, and again the tough Lee full-length resizing carbide die, no damage to the die. Now, carbide's pretty tough stuff, but it is a little bit on the brittle side, but Lee puts the carbide ring inside the steel a little bit to protect the carbide. And the carbide itself can stand a lot of abuse when it comes to grit because the carbide's harder than the grit. Yep, not bad. The Lee app press whipped right through all of this brass. Didn't take too long. So we're going to be ready to go ahead and do some wet tumbling tomorrow. This all started when we had about this much small primer pocket brass and turned into this because I didn't want to run a partial load through the wet tumbler. And as you know, we've done some videos recently on using vinegar and stainless steel pins, Dawn, to do our brass with really good results. Well, ArridExtraDry is wondering because I think there was a video that came out recently where this one shooter is actually tumbling wet with plain water first and then going ahead and taking that brass and running it a second time in the Dawn and LemiShine as a second step. And so ArridExtraDry is wondering what happens if we run just plain water and stainless steel pins, no Dawn, no LemiShine or vinegar, and are the results going to be as good? as using Dawn and Vinegar or LemiShine? Well, let's go ahead and test that. What I've got here is some grungy 45 ACP brass. It's been deprimed and resized already. Now we're going to go ahead and run this through our wet tumbler, but we're going to use plain water and stainless steel pins and see what kind of results we get. Now, this is presupposing that the water alone will be enough to remove a lot of this water soluble stuff and the debris, not using any soap, because if there's no grease, then why do we need soap? And if the brass is already nice and shiny underneath this grunge, then would just plain water work? Well, let's go ahead and load up our Frankfurt Arsenal wet tumbler and see. Okay, there you see almost a full load of brass, and the water's covering the brass. Let's cork this up. Okay, there you see we're running it for a little bit over 2 hours to give it a good test. Let's go ahead and come back in 2 hours. Now, water is an excellent solvent, and so even though we have no detergent in here, there's still a lot of dirt that was in there that's gonna separate with the water. So yeah, that water is filthy, all right, just like it normally is. Now we'll do some preliminary rinsing before we use our media separator. And again. Now we'll use our media separator. And here's the media separator in action. So you can tell right now that even though we're in the shade, that these cases look dingy. They don't have the luster to them that we get with the Dawn and the Vinegar. So it looks like that's a no-go. And the primer pockets are not as clean. They're definitely not as clean. That one's pretty clean. But see, that one's not as clean. So yeah, plain water doesn't work as well. I would not recommend it. But it was good to test it. And thanks to ArridExtraDry for suggesting the test. But no, we need to use the Dawn and the Vinegar or LemiShine. The brass has a flat look to it, kind of like it's dingy, no shine. So This is good that we found this out, so that we'll use the Dawn and LemiShine or Dawn and Vinegar. I think I prefer the Dawn and Vinegar from now on. Shooters and reloaders, good reloading to all of you out there. Take care, and we'll see you next video. Bye for now.